In this detailed example, we're going to look at measures of central tendency for 3 variables using the random sample of 20 cases from the 2012 General Social Survey. So let's suppose that we wanted to look at the measures of central tendency for 3 variables: education, race, and class. And so what we could do is first just kind of hide all the variables that we don't want to look at. And so again, if you click somewhere in the column heading of the variable and you hit the control button and hold it down, you can continue selecting variables. And then basically, if you click someplace in here and you click hide, that will hide the variables that we don't want. And so now we just have our 3 variables: education, race, and class. Let's begin with the variable race. Now, being a nominal variable, there's only one measure of central tendency that's appropriate, and that's the mode. So how do we figure out the mode for race? Well, we have to start with some kind of a frequency distribution. So again, we can make a pivot table. So again, if we go to the Insert pull-down menu and we hit Pivot Table, we have to select the data range, which is already selected because I highlighted the race variable before creating the pivot table. And then we have to find a location for our pivot table. And I'm going to put it in the existing worksheet. I just have to tell Excel where to put it. And so I'm just going to put it right here. And I'm going to click OK. And so I have the beginnings of a pivot table right here. I've got to scroll over to the other part of the screen and just fill in a few more things. And so I have to take my race variable and I have to move it down to where it says row label. And now notice I have my labels 1, 2, and 3. And I also have to move my race value down here where it says values. And so notice that it gives me the sum, but I actually don't want the sum. I want the count of these values, which will be the percentages. And so I've got to change this one more thing over here. I've got to pull this down in the field value setting from sum to count. And I click OK. And now I've got my frequency distribution. So we can basically just look at the frequency table and figure out what's the mode of this variable. Now, it would help us if we kind of put in the actual values of each of the categories. So people who are coded 1 are white, people who are coded black are 2, and then other is 3. And so we can see that the largest largest frequency in this case is white. And so that's the mode. And so we can basically say that most people in this sample are white. Advancing this video forward just a little bit, let's move on to our next variable, class. Now, class is measured at an ordinal level of measurement. And so the appropriate measures of central tendency for class are the mode and the median. Now, notice that I've already created the pivot table for class. And so we have a frequency distribution of all the categories of the variable. However, we need more than just the frequency distribution in order to calculate all the appropriate measures of central tendency. We also need the cumulative percent column in order to get the median. And so we're going to have to first take these values and create a percent column and a cumulative percent column. Unfortunately, when Excel creates a pivot table, notice that it embeds some codes in these values that makes it a little bit difficult to work with these values. And so what we could do basically is we can copy and paste this table and only paste in the values and not the codes, so that they're a little bit easier to work with. So we'll just highlight the data that we want, and we can hit Control-C to cut. And then if we go up here to paste, notice that there's a paste values. And so we can just paste the values, and that would overwrite the contents. And so notice now that it becomes a normal code without the pivot table code embedded in it. Okay, so now that we have the frequency, let's add a percent. And we basically just do that by taking each of these values and then dividing them by the total number of cases, and then multiplying that by 100. And then again, if we just basically click in this little portion of the table, we can drag this down and do that same operation for each one of the different columns. However, we first have to include something. In our formula, we have to put a $sign between the m and the 7 to reference the total number of cases. So we basically fix the point for the value of the total number of cases, which is located in cell M7. And so I just put a $sign in front of it. And now I put my cursor in that little box at the bottom right-hand corner. I'm just going to drag that down. And then if we just type in equals sum, it should add up to 100%. Okay, so now we need a cumulative percent column. And remember that we get the cumulative percent by keeping running total. So this is going to equal the category, the first category. And then we're going to just basically add that to the next highest category. And we're going to continue doing that until we've gotten through every category and we're up to 100%. Okay, so here's our cumulative percent column. We can resize some of these things if we want to. And we basically have all that we need to create our measures of central tendency. Now, it would probably help to label these things. So 1 is lower class, 2 is working class, 3 is middle class, and then 4 is upper class. And so what are the patterns here that we notice? Well, we can see that most cases, the true mode in this case is working class, because 10 of the 20, or 50%, the highest percent and the highest frequency, are working class. But notice, however, that middle class is also pretty close. So you could say that this is an approximately bimodal distribution. And we would interpret that basically by saying most people in the distribution are either working class or middle class. What about the median? How do we find the median? Well, we go to the cumulative percent column, and we find the first one to include 50%. And so this one's too small, and so it's this one. And so the median in this case is going to be working class. And so how do we interpret that? Well, we would say that half the sample is working class or below, and the other sample is working class or above, because the working class is in the exact middle. It's the category that splits the distribution exactly in half. Okay, advancing the video yet again, let's look at the measures of central tendency for our final variable, education. So notice that here I have the univariate statistics table for education, which is what we've created in one of our earlier detailed examples. And so if you are still confused about how to make univariate statistics tables, take another look at that detailed example, and you'll see how I created this table. And so I could have, again, used the pivot table to get the frequencies, and we just saw how to make percentages and cumulative percentages. Let's use these values to actually figure out the values of the measures of central tendency for the variable education. Let's start with the most simple one, the mode. So because education is an interval ratio variable, we can use any of the three. So what's the mode here? Well, we're looking for the value that has the highest percent or the highest frequency. And notice that 5 out of the 20 people, or 25%, have 12 years of education. And so that's the true mode. But notice also that 4 out of the 20 people, or 20% of the distribution, have 17 years of education. And 4 and 5, 20 and 25% respectively, are very close to one another. And so again, we can say that this is approximately bimodal. So how would we interpret the mode? Well, we would basically say that most people in this distribution have either 12 or 17 years of education. All right, what about the median? Well, for the median, we're going to look at the cumulative percent column, and we're trying to figure out which is the first to include 50%. And so that's this one. Notice, however, that it's exactly on 50. And so that means that the median is between this category and the next highest category. And so because this is an interval ratio variable, we're going to take these two categories and average them. And so we're going to basically take 13 and add 14. And we can put that in parentheses. And then we can divide that value by 2. And so the median in this case is going to be 13.5. Well, what about the mean? How do we get the mean? Well, in order to get the mean, what we have to do is we have to take the categories of the variable and multiply them by their frequency. And then we have to add those together and divide it by the total number of cases. And so let's see how to do that. Okay, so first of all, let's make a new column in our table that is going to be equal to educ times the value of the frequency. And so that's going to basically equal, for each of the different categories, the category itself times the frequency. And so for the first category, we see that these people have 10 years of education. There's only one of them. So 10 times 1 is 1. We have to do this for every category. So again, if we just put our cursor down at the bottom right-hand corner and scroll down, it will do the calculations for every one of these categories. And so for example, this value is found by taking the category 11, multiplying it by 2 to get a 22. 60 is the product of 12 and 5, right? And so we do this for every category. And now we're going to take the sum of those values across all categories. And so we're going to divide this value by the total number of cases, in which case is 20. And that'll give us our average, 14.1. And so notice that we can interpret this by saying that people on average have a little over 14 years of education. And we can see that our average is a little bit higher than our median, suggesting that there's a slight positive skew, or at least that's what we suspect. And so we probably have some people who have relatively high education that are pulling up the mean.